All right, let's continue now in this conversation. Our focus on the cost of living, particularly looking at the fuel price hike and how this impacts on the cost of living and business operations. We're joined in studio by familiar face, Mary Phadi, President of the Truckers Association of South Africa. We have also via Zoom economist Professor Bonke Dumisa and DA Member of Parliament Dr. Dion George. Good evening. Thank you for coming in, and good evening to you.
Good evening.
And thank you for coming on. We've already heard the SAB concluding that the administered fuel prices in South Africa were a significant driver of inflation, as key components of the fuel price have risen above inflation in recent years. COSATU has been calling for a review of the model of fuel prices since 2019 at least, and we were promised this by various leadership since 2019 and in 2022. It's yet to be seen actually in practice. But let's start here, Professor Dumisa. Is it correct to say that a lot, at least, of our cost of living challenges are about the price of fuel?
That is the real truth and nothing else but the truth. The reality is almost 90%, in fact more than 90% of all the goods that we use and eat are transported by road. And those trucks which transport that food and those goods use diesel. And if you increase the price of diesel and even petrol, that automatically adds to the cost of doing business. So every time there is a fuel price adjustment upwards, that adds to the rising cost of doing business and the rising cost of living for the consumers.
Yeah. And Dr. Dion, let's talk then about that and focusing on the 28%, because it's said that at least 28% of the fuel price actually is made up of taxes that we pay. And of course, there's the 53 to 55%, which is the general fuel price or fuel levy, which is a cost maybe that could not be determined so much here in the country. And then you've got other smaller margins that are added on by the wholesale transporting of the stuff within South Africa. What have we been doing as far as that 28% in the past, and what can we be doing better?
Yes, well, I think the key thing is that the taxes and the levies on fuel are pushing up the price of petrol and diesel. Now, the taxes and levies are approximately 33% of the price of the fuel. And that is very significantly high. And that tax is made up of the general fuel levy and the road accident levy. Now, we believe that we should be looking at the general fuel levy, which brings in about 80 billion rand per annum into the fisc, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but we do believe that government can alleviate there. So what's happening is, as the professor also said, is that the price of food is being fueled literally by the price of the diesel and the petrol that we need to put into the tanks and the trucks. So we need to bring that down. And government can do that very easily by scrapping those taxes. As you also mentioned, the South African Reserve Bank recently said that inflation is being driven by the fuel price, and they made certain recommendations. We don't support a price cap because that we don't believe will work. But we do think that government should be working to take that tax away, because they can do that. Because your average South African household is battling to put enough food on the table, and that's a direct result of the tax that's being placed on the fuel that they need to put into the tanks. And then that knocks on to the food. So that's where we need to look. And there is, in fact, enough space on the national balance sheet to do that very effectively and actually very quickly also.
Yeah. Can they take that away quite easily, right? Fine, the general fuel levy amounts for about 90 billion at least when they didn't increase it the last time. That's what we saw being taken out of the fiscus. Both that and the road accident fund, they say in some calculations amounts to about 138 billion. So let's talk about REF, for example. If we're saying we'd take that away, what would we do around road safety and the cost that brings to government anyway, which is estimated about 150 billion rands? Where would that come from?
We've been looking specifically at the general fuel levy. That's what we've been looking at rather than the road accident fund. But you do have solutions for both. So, for example, if you look at the general fuel levy, which is about 80 billion rand, if you look at some of the very heavy ticket items that we have on the national balance sheet. For example, we have bailouts, never-ending bailouts to the state-owned enterprises. We have VIP units for protection for politicians that isn't required. We have enormous amount of wasteful spending that happens. We've also got a bloated public sector wage bill. So I, for example, have an alternative budget every year in February and then an alternative medium-term budget policy statement in October, where we very clearly have set out where the government can cut back very significantly to make the space for this 80 billion. So we do believe that's very easily doable. And in fact, we also believe there's enough space to cut VAT off a larger basket of foodstuff as well to alleviate the most difficult households struggle to put enough food on the table. But on the road accident fund, yes, of course, that fund is very important because that, of course, does compensate people for accidents that they're in. But there are other solutions that could be considered. For example, what happens in other jurisdictions is that you have a compulsory insurance for motorists that cover that. Now, of course, South Africa isn't in that kind of a space at the moment where we would be able to get to a solution like that. So we're not proposing that right now. But we certainly believe that we could move in that direction. So we're not proposing that we must just take away that levy. No, it needs to be replaced, and it could be replaced by an insurance scenario. But it would need to be thought through very carefully, of course. We also believe that it's important for all of the stakeholders in the industry to have a discussion on it, to discuss how it is possible that we can bring the price down. Yeah. Because if we look at a different model, we can actually do that. But it is fundamentally important we do that. Another big problem we have on the price of fuel is the dollar-rand exchange.
Yes.
Now, we know that our rand is very significantly undervalued. And the reason for that is because our government has made some very bad choices in terms of its international relationships. And that has put enormous pressure on our ability to grow our economy and then on our currency, etc. So the whole system hangs together. So we need to start fixing that. And where you start is with government making more sensible choices that will impact on that, and that eventually lands up impacting the food on the most vulnerable families' tables.
I want to climb on that point that you've just made before, that last one, and then we'll come back to it and deal with the undervalued rand. But I want to bring you into that aspect of it, where other players, being yourself, the private sector, is there something that you can do, a part that you can play, international best practice of how we can better come up with a model of transportation, for example, that could bring some kind of alleviation to the people?
Look, with the research that was done, it is there's a document that will be able to assist us to get a subsidy from the government, and also looking at the issue of the rebate, which is something that we've been calling on to the government to say, let's sit around the table and try and engage and find a solution towards that. So, yes, there is something that if the government can open the door, because this freight industry is not subsidized. And, it seems like, the interpretation of the government is that this is the industry that can be able to survive on its own. And it's not possible to be able to survive because as the transport costs are increasing, remember that the clients are then squeezing us with the rate. And as they squeeze us with the rate, transporters cannot be able to survive. And let me tell you something, as this increase comes in, when it drops, it doesn't drop the way with the same percentage that it has been increased with.
Yeah. How does it drop? Talk to us. Tell us. How do you feel the impact as transporters?
Look, the percentage of the drop is not equal to the increases that we have received for the past 2 years. The increase is much more, referencing to what we've already heard now, to say if that engagements with other countries and the relations that we need to make sure that we have as South Africa with other countries, that decrease will be much more higher. Yeah. But it will not get there because there's political cap that is involved. There are issues that is beyond our own control as a country. And as that is happening, while they are still engaging, as operators, things are going bad from our side. Yeah.
So you're saying, for example, the two cycles of reprieve that we have seen, compared to the many hikes that we have been experiencing, at least in the last 18 months, you say they don't even begin to touch sides for you. Don't get any sort of reprieve from those decreases.
As they increase, the decline is less. And, 2 months later, it increases again, but the decline is less. And where you find a huge decline, you'll realize that it has already affected you 3 months ago. So, either or, there is nothing that is happening. We are just rotating in one place.
Is that why people would say, but the price has dropped, but the price of bread is still the same?
Exactly.
But we raised it last month because we said the price of petrol is going up.
And who will reduce or who will give you a better rate? Because rates can be negotiated on the yearly basis. So if somebody has given you a rate and there's a price increase, by the time you negotiate next year, you are already getting a lesser rate compared to the rate that you initially signed in your contract.
Yeah. And so you're saying the only way for us out of this is a subsidy?
I am saying that as we engage, as we are talking to the government, they must find a way of engaging freight. They must not think that freight can survive on its own. Gone are those years where we used to survive. But now there's a challenge. It comes from the pandemic. It doesn't end there. The economy is growing very slow. Yeah. And, whatever that is happening is getting much more expensive on a daily basis. Anything that you see on that vehicle, whether it's a tire or any product that you buy, whether it's fuel for you to be able to transport, everything has been increased. So either or, the industry is not surviving at the moment at the pace the way it used to survive before the pandemic.
Right, let's take a break. You can weigh in tonight, 0721105584. You can also send us a message on X at Newzroom405. What needs to happen in a better way than what we have been able to do up until this point? What are your thoughts? You can weigh in tonight. Dr. Dion George staying on, Professor Bonke Dumisa staying on, as well as Mary Phadi with us in the studio. We're back in a moment. Mary Phadi, President of the Truckers Association of South Africa, still on. Economist Professor Bonke Dumisa and DAMP Dr. Dion George. Professor Dumisa said that high increases for petrol, diesel and paraffin will destroy the lives of ordinary citizens. No truth more said than that one, Prof. But let's bring you back here. I need you to talk to two issues. One, I need you to talk to the question of, can the government afford at least to better administer, especially the general fuel levy? So if you hear, for example, the truckers saying, give us a subsidy, you hear the taxis saying, give us a subsidy, you hear the buses saying, give us a subsidy, where will government get that money if they are not pulling it from some tax or the other? And so if we are reducing those levies, where exactly are they going to get the money to subsidize all these people?
Can I start from a very fundamentalist position on this one? They say there's no free lunch in this world. And let me say that I agree we must find solutions to deal with the issue of all these taxes on on fuel. I mean, we're paying over R2 something for RAF, and we know that there's a lot of abuse when it comes to RAF, but every time the government tries to deal with the issues at RAF, lawyers take it to court and they do so successfully. So it looks like the government is helpless in dealing with the issue of RAF, but we know there's a lot of abuse when it comes to RAF. When we move to the general fuel tax levy, yes, we can do something about that one, but let us do it first and see if ever it works before we can say we are going to cut it. We cannot just cut it. You remember what happened in 2022 for those, or was it 2021, for those 4 months when the government did forgo about R1.50 per litre in order to accommodate the South African road users. It could not last long because the government ran out of money. As it is now, the National Treasury has publicly, and this is very rare, has gone publicly to say they've run out of money. We've got many people who have actually abused that statement to say their own things, but what they're simply saying is money does not grow on trees. For you to print money, there must be something that it represents. That's another topic. So what I'm simply saying is we cannot just fiddle with those taxes and hope that the government, the money that government gets from this will get from somewhere, because our tax base is actually shrinking. People are emigrating, and we are not bringing more people who are going to be high earners into these valuable tax brackets. So we need to be very careful on how we go about dealing with the issue of taxes on fuel. Yeah. But let us go back to the beginning on how we arrive at some of these prices. The international Brent crude oil prices went from below $70 per barrel 2 months back to $88 by today. Those are the reasons why we've had such a high fuel price adjustment when it comes to both diesel and petrol.
Yeah.
And it has already been said that the fuel prices have also gone up because our rand has actually weakened against the US dollar.
Yes.
Despite all the other reasons why it weakened, but it also did improve at a certain point in time.
Yeah.
So we must always make sure that we take care of our political certainty and also our economic certainty, so that it does not interfere with the rand a lot, because we buy that international Brent crude oil in US dollars. Yes. And we cannot run away from the fact that the US dollar has, in a way, been weaponized. So we are wrong. We are wrong if we do the right thing. We are wrong if we do the wrong things. So we must look at all those things, but let us not look for quick solutions which are not going to be sustainable in dealing with this important matter.
There are no quick solutions, I suppose. I mean, when we look at that 53 to 55%, which is determined, as you put it, by the fuel that we're importing, and that's where the costs sit, is there something we can do about that? Because by importing oil from international producers, we are also paying insurance, we are also paying storage, we are also paying the transportation of that to bring it into the country. And then, of course, we have to buy the oil price in US dollars, and that would be impacted by the exchange rate. So somebody would be saying, looking at that, are there other places where we can be bringing oil into the country other than looking at international producers who will charge us in US dollars? We just said BRICS, and there are many other oil-rich countries here on the continent.
On a lighter note on this one of BRICS, have you noticed that most of the new countries which have been brought in are oil-producing countries? And within BRICS, there is this agreement then that what they pay, they may up to 30% of what they pay may be made of their own currencies. I do not know, I don't have inside information, but let us hope then that our government and the other governments, as they brought in these new members, of course, one of the leading countries in pushing up prices, Saudi Arabia, is one of the countries they've brought in. So I do not know if ever we are bringing in someone who's going to be giving us headaches every 2 months. So let us see if ever we can negotiate within BRICS then that we can avoid this thing of buying via the US dollar, at least pay 30% of that using our own currencies. But those are difficult calculations, and let us not rush the financial fundis, the financial gurus who will be calculating these things. And that's why Minister Enoch Godongwana has said that they are not yet at a position to deal with the issue of a BRICS currency. So let us not rush them, but let us find ways in which we can mitigate some of the high costs we pay because of paying via the petrodollar.
Dr. George?
I think the president,
yes, you can weigh in. Coming.
Right when he says that we mustn't hold our breath for anything happening with BRICS, because we're certainly not going to see a de-dollarization, or we're not going to see a BRICS currency anytime soon, if ever. But I do think that we need to look very carefully at the situation. And if you look at the current realities that we have now, if we look at where we are currently in the financial year, if we cut the general fuel tax tomorrow, we would be looking at about a 31 billion rand knock to the fisc. Now, that is not an insignificant amount of money. But, as the professor also said, is we need to look at fundamentals. The more fundamental matter here is that we need to look at growth in our economy. The reason why we don't have enough money in our economy, and the reason why we can't then look at how to make life easier for the freight industry, for example, whether it's through a subsidy or something like that, is because there isn't enough money. There's not enough revenue. And why isn't there enough revenue? It's because our economy is not growing. And what's happening is investors are leaving our economy rather than joining it. That is the fundamental problem. And that fundamental problem is that government is positioned in the wrong place in our economy. So if government focused on delivering the services and the basic services that it needs to provide, and then does not think that it can sit in the center of the economy and generate jobs and growth miraculously, that's not going to happen. They've tried it. It doesn't work. So what does work is government needs to focus on its job and then get out of the way and let the private sector thrive. Let the economy grow. That will then absorb jobs into the economy. That means that we will get more revenue that we will be able to spend into the economy, or cut the taxes that are pushing the food off the most vulnerable South Africans' tables. That's where we need to start. So we can't look outside. Nobody's going to save us from this problem. We can't look to BRICS. We can't look anywhere. We've got to look inside South Africa. And the fundamental problem is government has made the wrong economic choices, and it's placed itself in the wrong place. That's what the key problem is. If government was able to incentivize and kickstart growth in our economy, we'd then see the numbers rise. We would then see a lesser need to tax fuel, for example. And we would have a lesser need for government to suck up space in the economy that they do now. Then you have a virtuous cycle arising.
But how do we deal with the issue that the professor is raising, the weaponization of the US dollar? One would say, for example, especially of late, one of the things that would have affected our strength of our rand would have been our non-aligned stance in the Russia-Ukraine war. So if we are not going to allow the U.S. to dictate to us who our friends are going to be, we will suffer that because we're going to be seeing a weakening rand. The other issue that certainly knocked the value of the rand is the Simon's Town issue. After that came out, we saw a rand losing a significant amount of its strength. So these are the policy decisions that you would say our government was wrong in taking, hence they would have affected the rand-dollar exchange.
These were, yes, indeed, very bad decisions made by government. So, for example, having the Lady R problem certainly didn't attract investors. Having its position, taking up a non-aligned position on the war in Ukraine, that does not do South Africa any favors. But that is not actually the fundamental problem either. That's one of the symptoms of a bigger problem. Our currency is in the condition that it is because we are not an attractive destination. Because what happens, if you are an attractive destination, people will want to buy rand. And the rand would then get stronger because supply and demand works that way. And then your exchange rate would improve. But the problem is that people don't want to do that. So they're not investing, which means that the rand actually does get weaker. And so that spiral continues. So what you want to do is if you have an environment that is attractive for investors, both foreign and local, because we know that in South Africa there is a mountain of money, of cash, that has been saved up in business and elsewhere. But people don't want to invest it because they don't trust the system. They don't trust they're going to get returns. That environment isn't conducive for that. Same for foreign investors. They are skittish about putting their money in South Africa because they're concerned, well, am I going to make a profit? And what's going to happen? Because the government is making all these really odd decisions. That is the thing. If you are an attractive destination, your currency appreciates. And that means it makes the fuel cheaper. So that is where we need to focus. Growth incentives and then creating that environment that will not chase investors away, but rather bring them in. We know AGO is at risk now because of what our government has done, but actually that's looking a bit more positive now because there has been conversations and the right discussions held, etc., which is a good thing. So government is starting to point itself in a more non-aligned position because that's where they're supposed to be. What they did was they veered off that, but now they're more back on track, which is a good thing for our economy. But as I said, fundamentally, if we start fixing those fundamental problems, get government aligned to its right position in the economy, make South Africa attractive for investors, local and international, and that will take care of the rand. That will happen. And so that's where we need to focus. We can't look at other people to save us from our problems. It's not going to happen. BRICS is not. What they're going to do is they're going to extract what they can from South Africa. That is what would happen. So no, we need to be strong and stable on our own feet and declare very loudly, we are South African, we are strong in our economy, and we don't need rescue from anybody. We can, in fact, rescue ourselves by making the right choices, by creating an environment conducive to growth that will attract investors, that will come. Okay. That's really
I'm going to circle to the Prof in just a moment on that as well. I see him quite eager to weigh in on some of the issues that you're raising. But let me bring you, Mrs. Phadi here in the studio. We had a conversation not so long ago around the transportation freight sector being committed to transforming yourself to an extent to remove yourself from the roads, get back on the rail. You're saying you can certainly have some private-public partnership going on there where you haul, you connect, and ziash, right? Is there more that you could do in terms of that kind of transformation? And I don't know to what degree would that be able to save us on the fuel side of transportation, where we seek some more renewable methods of transportation of goods.
Just before I get there, Thabo, it is really worrying what the professor is saying, that we should not rush into, the subsidy and pushing the government into the corner. We should rush that. Remember that we are sitting here and in advocating for the operators out there. They are losing their trucks on a daily basis, and the road infrastructure is not in the good condition. and there's a congestion on the border post where companies are struggling to offload on time, whether you go to the SADC region or local in South Africa. So the government must take that decision tomorrow, because if they do that, they are going to assist a lot of operators not to be out of business. What will help us if we are saying that let's go in a slow pace? When companies are closing down, and when they close down, we will not even have enough trucks that will be able to deliver those goods to the nearest warehouses where consumers will be able to benefit. So what is worrying is that the government always wants to get in when there's challenges. You speak about the issue of the rail, from road to rail. The reason why they are finding it hard to open that access, it is because they know very well that it's going to resolve this issue. And I don't understand why we should be discussing the other part and not talk about rail when it has got a solution. So the government would always want things to go so bad. And when things are bad, then they'll be able to listen. And what we are saying as an association is that, or all associations, is that let's find a solution that will be helping our own government, that will be helping operators before we get to a ticking bomb. And, the reason why we are here now is because we've been singing the same song of saying, let's move some of the trucks back to rail. And guess what? They are resisting to do that because the private sector must take over. But we are giving them a solution before there's a crisis in the country. So now we are sitting with a problem whereby we are only discussing freight that is moving 90% of the goods on the road. Again, we don't want to discuss a subsidy. What kind of a government that does not want to assist an operator that is taking food to the people that they are saving? I don't understand that.
Yeah, and the whole conversation around there is just not enough money to go around.
There should be money.
The professor saying we have a strange declaration from Treasury saying we just don't have money. Basically saying, yes, you're asking for subsidies, but money doesn't grow on trees. Where are we going to get it from?
There's going to be money if you think for your consumers. There's going to be enough money if you think about the people that are sitting at home that are buying the bread at a high price. There's going to be enough money if the government wants to rotate what we have inside the country. There is no money if the government is waiting for us to be able to challenge them much deeper before they take out the money. There's always money. There's money somewhere in the coffers.
Yeah. Prof, let's talk about those issues that Dr. George is raising, the fundamentals, right? Positioning the country in the economy properly, but two, making South Africa attractive to investment.
Strangely enough, I'm sure he's going to say, Joe, this guy is agreeing with me. Strangely enough, I fully agree with him on the position that he's taking, that for us to see very good economic growth in the country, we need to create a conducive economic environment for the private sector to thrive in, and in that case create real jobs. Because this whole thing of the government having 1.2 million people working for government, and those people taking over 33.33% of the government expenditure is just not sustainable at all. And all the countries which are growing fast and are doing very well are not doing the thing. So let us create a very conducive economic environment. And when I said that, let us not rush into making decisions which will involve more government expenditures, I meant that because this is the first time the National Treasury has actually come out and said, there is no money. So we need to make sure now that we do the right things. As it was said, let us do the right things to attract foreign investment and local investment, because we've got very little local investment, so that is going to create more jobs, and then we may have more people being added to the taxpayer base, which is shrinking. So I agree there. But what I'm simply saying is, when we're talking about the economic fundamentals, then let us look at them holistically and not just from an angle which suits us.
I know we've been focusing a lot on the fuel part of things. Is there more that can be done as far as that probably is concerned, but also as far as our social security network? Because somebody else would come and say, well, to help us with the cost of living crisis, we must bring in the basic income grant, and that's where we need to come in. Again, I see you shaking your head because Treasury has said, "Aguna mali," there's nothing left. There is no way we can actually do that. So are we not open to that particular conversation at this point?
No, we are not, because I've had people who are busy pushing the issue of the basic income grant. Let me remind you of one thing. Maybe some people who are listening to this are not old enough to know what was happening in the United Kingdom in the past. In the United Kingdom, in the distant past, everyone wanted to move there, and even when they started the EU, the people from other countries within the EU wanted to move to the United Kingdom because of the dole system. And the United Kingdom has slowly and gradually and strategically cut down on the dole system because it is not sustainable. So in South Africa, where you've got more than 60% of the youth being unemployed, and when we're talking about the expanded definition of unemployment, we've got over 32.6% of the people being unemployed. Bringing in the basic income grant will not work because you have more people who actually want that money than the people who will give in the money and get something back. So let us look at things which are sustainable, and that must not include pushing more money from the social welfare system is already compromising the country. Let us look at growing the economy as a way of boosting the government revenues that will then sustain everyone, and change our education system, of course, because we currently produce many people who are not ready to fit in for the needs of our industrial economy.
Let's leave it there.
But
much appreciated.
Discussion for another day.
Yeah, we'll definitely circle around to that. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time. Dr. Dion George, Professor Dumisa, and Mary here in the studio. Much appreciated, and thank you very much for coming on.